Welcome, my friends, to the Sage Quay Radio Hour, your home for free and critical thinking, and I'm your host, Mike Williams. And joining me for tonight's segment is my blog partner, Al Williams. Tonight, our very special guest is Mark Sargent. Mark is the creator of the very popular Flat Earth videos called Flat Earth Clues, which have taken YouTube by storm. Mark's videos are the result of his researching and looking into the Flat Earth theory. His presentations of his findings represent his perspectives, and he's not aligned to any orthodoxy. Mark, through his videos, is simply presenting his ideas and thoughts on how a geocentric or Earth-centric model might work versus the current heliocentric model that permeates our current understanding of Earth's place in the cosmos. The conversation with Mark was wide-ranging, very thought-provoking, and a lot of fun. So without further ado, here's Mark Sargent. Let's take a listen. Okay, so now, Mark, before we dive into the show, I noticed that your notoriety, because of your Flat Earth videos, that it has gained a lot of attention over the last, I would say, weeks, months.
Yes.
And there's the obvious criticism that comes from the heliocentric crowd, and that would be expected. But oddly enough, you're also being criticized from some of the flat earthers and some of the people that believe in that theory. And I was wondering if you wanted to take a moment and maybe address that criticism, especially the criticism that's coming from the flat earthers.
Sure. No, I'd be happy to. When I initially dug into this flat Earth thing, like 9 months ago, I had looked, and there's at that time there was still is, a very limited amount of flat Earth material on YouTube. But I looked into Eric Dubé's stuff and Matt from the NASA channel and Kelajagia and Cesar, and everything was fine. I'd made my the first 8 clues and everything was fine. And then I'd done a couple interviews. And in one of the interviews, I had mentioned very specifically, because people ask me about the sun and the moon all the time. And they, and I said, well, if you want to look at some interesting moon stuff, check out Crow 777's, CRROW 777. On YouTube. And I preface it every time I'm asked. I said, look, Crow is not a flat earther, but he takes some of the most unusual videos of the moon that I've ever seen. And he is not, he follows the holographic universe model. And some of the flat earthers came back at me and said, well, you can't mention him. And I was like, why would that be? And it's, well, because he's not a flat earther and he follows a completely different universe model. I go, yeah, but he has the best moon footage out there. If you want to cast doubt about the moon, that's the guy you got to go see. And he's got a ton of followers and a ton of hits. There was quite a bit of backlash there. And then it was like, well, you're also not saying that the earth is perfectly flat like a coin. So you can't be a pure flat earther. You have to change your model. Mine follows the Orlando Ferguson map from 180 years ago, more or less. That the flat and stationary Earth. I said it's more like a roulette table in my model, and they go, no, you got to change that. I said, good. Well, no, I don't. It's my model. And so they said, well, you're obviously a government employee and a psyop, and we're going to discredit you. And it's like, okay, fine. If you want to say that, I don't mind if they say that I'm not a traditional purist flat earther. I don't mind that. Calling me, though, a government employee is a whole nother thing. I don't work out of an NSA office. I'm up here in Boulder, Colorado, just sitting in my house. Nothing special. But yeah, it's gotten a little heated over the last couple of weeks, especially in the last week, actually. And so, in fact, the last interview I did, literally, I titled the name of the interview, "Is Mark Sargent a shill?" The person that came at me was a very, very strong Eric supporter. And it's like, all right, bring it on. I'll put out the interview. I've got nothing to hide. So
I've had this discussion with other guests where they bump into the similar types of things, and it comes under the umbrella, if you do not think as I think, then you're not thinking. And you can't be in the club. So that's very unfortunate.
It happens, and again, I put the olive branch out there. I am trying to, but again, there's these sticking points, which I think both sides know full well that we're not gonna. It's like, look, I'm not changing my model just because you say so. Eric's videos I know he wrote a book, but I didn't know that when I was doing it, and his videos have only been out like they're 4 months.
Yeah.
So anyway. I'm still not going to say anything bad about the guy. Not going to do it.
Yeah. No, don't go there. And it's your perspective, and it's your prerogative to give your thoughts on the topic. So anyway, so with that, Mark, I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about your journey in life and how you came to research the flat Earth.
Sure. like a lot of people in conspiracy circles, I started out with the easy stuff, years ago, the JFK thing, and then got into the more the garden variety stuff. I didn't touch on every conspiracy that was out there, but I was aware of all of them, including the flat Earth model, which I absolutely refuse to touch because it's ludicrous, it's insane. Nobody in their right mind would ever look at it because it's considered not only an archaic religious belief, but from a scientific standpoint, because of the way we're conditioned, it's considered just ridiculousness. It's horrible. So after going through for years and years and years all the conspiracies, about 9 months ago, I just happened to glance, at the last book on the shelf, the one that I refused to read, which was, the flat Earth theory or the enclosed world theory or, the Truman Show theory, whichever way you want to look at it, and started digging into it. And I thought it was just going to be literally just like an empty Pandora's box, a lot of hype and open it up, nothing there. And as I was looking into it, I started digging into, some of the YouTube videos, especially, and, like Eric's stuff and Matt from the NASA channel. And some of it started to make sense. So I dug around and did some research on my own. And by the time about, 8 weeks ago, I had this moment of clarity where, for me, it was like, the flat Earth stuff, it sounded kind of like a staticky radio station, and all it really needed, in my opinion, was some structure. So I woke up one morning and I had the narrative in my head. It was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to, I'm going to lay out, just a narrative and slides, make it in Windows Live Movie Maker and throw it out there. And, honestly, I didn't think anything of it. I was like, I'll just add this to the mix. Nothing's going to come of it. And for some reason, it just resonated with a lot of people. Even though I did everything I could to minimize the footprint on YouTube, I didn't allow likes and dislikes. I didn't allow comments. I didn't monetize anything. Everything was real generic. But over the last 8 weeks, it's been amazing the response I've gotten. I instead of the hate mail that I thought I would have gotten and crank phone calls because I put my email and my real phone number.
Yeah, I saw that.
At the end of every video.
You're a brave man.
People keep saying that, but it's
Yeah,
not
it's pretty
true.
risky.
No. It was initially done because I really wanted to avoid the shill label.
Yeah.
It's like, that's one of the easiest ways. It's like, look, put your real phone number. In fact, by number 10, I put my actual home address. Nobody's knocked on my door yet, but I'm sure it'll happen sooner or later. But the people I haven't even gotten a crank call in the middle of the night. It's been very, very positive.
Yeah.
And, the interviews have been real steady and it's like fantastic, wonderful. And with it comes, the other side of it, because people say, well, where did he come from? He came out of nowhere. It came on too fast, and there's got to be a agenda. It's like, no, man, I'm not selling T-shirts or coffee mugs or anything. I'm just for me, it was just getting the word out there. But it's been a real interesting journey so far.
It's interesting because you tell me if I'm wrong on this, but I watched all 11 segments, and it was very interesting. I had just stumbled upon it.
Yeah.
When I first looked at it, I thought to myself, the same thing you thought, oh God, please, okay? And so I started watching it. I watched the first segment. I'm like, well, that was interesting. And so they went to the second one and the third one and so on. And so the gist that I got from your presentation is this, and again, correct me if I'm wrong.
Sure.
I'm viewing this as your perspective based upon your research. It's
Yes.
a narrative. You're not claiming it to be fact or gospel or
No.
hard evidence. You're just saying, look, I've researched this, and based upon my research, I've drawn the following conclusions.
Yeah.
If you agree with me, fine. If you don't agree with me, that's fine also. Am I wrong?
No, you're absolutely right. As a matter of fact, when I set out to do this initially, the one that kind of put me over the edge as far as doing digging into it deeper was Matt from the NASA channel, that little narrative that he did when his girlfriend did that thing where he was sitting on the couch and he was talking about how he was a NASA employee. And I thought that was such a wonderful story. True or not, I wanted to snuff it out. I was like, well, this should be easy enough to disprove, because, and that's what I did when I was building this model. When I was trying to figure out the inner workings of it, I said to myself, well, if I ever get to a point where absolutely I cannot get past a hurdle, it's like, well, obviously it's not, not flattish or flat because of this, then I'll just quit. And I never got to that point. And I also said the same thing with the clues when I was making the clues. I said, if I ever get to a clue where it just, because I play it back and I watch it before I release it.
Right.
If I get to a clue that I don't like, I'm just going to walk away from it. And I never threw away a single clue, which was amazing to me. I thought for sure I'd get to a clue and I'd be like, this isn't working at all. But no, it all rang true for me.
Now, you mentioned Crow, and
Yeah.
what Mark is referring to for the audience is Crow Triplehorn, who has a YouTube channel that's Crow. It's CRROW 777. And you're referring to his discovery of the lunar wave.
The Lunar Wave. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Fantastic stuff.
it's really incredible stuff. And what's interesting about it is that along with Crow, I believe there are 7 other amateur astronomers that
Hmm.
have filmed the wave.
Yeah.
And they have ruled out that it is a an anomaly with the camera and the lens and all that stuff. And according to Crow, he's had some very, very smart people look at it and take a
Yeah.
look at it and understand the equipment he's using and so on. So it's interesting to me that you are getting pushback because you are bringing into the equation the fact that Crow has this discovery and he's
Yeah.
put it out there.
Yeah.
And I mean, to me, it's fair game. I mean, why would you not look at that and consider that and say, okay, so what's going on with the moon?
Yeah, exactly. And I've put out to the Flat Earth Society. Well, there's 2 Flat Earth Societies now. And if you know the Monty Python world, it's the Judea's People's Front versus the People's Front of Judea. And it is. I've told these guys. I've said, look, if there's better moon footage out there, I will use it. If you endorse better moon footage than he's putting out there, I will absolutely use it. And nobody's responding because there's nothing better out there. That video's footage. I mean, it is spooky, spooky stuff to
Yeah.
think that there is a refresh rate issue with the moon. You're looking at it, it's like, okay, what am I looking at exactly? It's fantastic.
Plus, he has it down to moments in time, like the equinox and so on.
Yeah,
So it's getting more and more specific and more detailed the more
yeah,
he does this work. So it becomes very, very interesting.
yeah, yeah,
The other thing too, and we'll get more into this. I was just telling Al before we had this call that, and you're probably aware of this, that the University of Colorado Boulder had announced back in December of 2014, they claimed that there's a protective shield
yeah,
similar to the force fields. This is a quote you might find and see in Star Trek.
yeah,
Another director who was involved in the program that said it's almost like these electrons, because they're claiming that this shield deflects electrons from outer space, are
yeah,
running into a glass wall in space.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
just found it, and I remember reading that back in December 2014, and I believe I actually put it up on the blog, and I thought to myself, well, isn't that interesting?
Yeah. It's almost like between that and, if you believe in predictive programming, and I've stated several times before that I don't, this is one of those conspiracies that if it does hold true, that it is something that was never going to be a secret forever because it couldn't be. Logistically, it was just too hard. And so it could be that, yeah, they're slowly but surely, they'll feign ignorance to a certain point if this thing actually does come out. They'll say,
Yeah.
"Oh, well, we just discovered. Who knew?" It's like really?
Yeah, right.
But yeah, yeah, very, very interesting stuff. Yeah, and University of Boulder, yeah, is right down the street.
So, Mark, when you talk about the flat Earth,
Hmm.
what does it look like from your perspective?
From my perspective, and since we don't have a diagram to show people, the easiest reference, and I know I've overused it in certain instances, is a giant version of the Truman Show, thousands of miles wide, where you have people living, where we are living on the inside of it with no idea that there's a boundary on the outer edge, which is circular, and the upper edge, which is a giant, projection system, with the exception of the sun and the moon, which appear to be, large but not super large, three-dimensional objects that are actually inside the structure. So the map that I try to refer people to, as far as the circular map, is the azimuthal equidistant map, which is on the wiki list of map projections, which shows, if you crushed a globe from the North Pole down, what you would see is a circular pattern where the continents are kind of grouped towards the center. The outer ring is just, a giant series of southern hemisphere oceans, and then Antarctica is literally stretched around the entire outer edge of the map. And The upper edge, and again, the height is really disputed at this point. I say it's a minimum of 400 miles high, but maximum, it's really tough. I don't think it's that standard snow globe model where it's a very, very high arc. I liken it more to a sports stadium where it's a fairly shallow dome because you don't need anything super, super deep because most of the population down here doesn't get up that high anyway. The only people that get up to any sort of altitude is NASA.
Yeah.
So, but that's what you're looking at. It kind of like a squish snow globe slash Truman Show slash, there's other movies I could reference, but or the TV series that's currently out Under the Dome, only much bigger, and you can't see it. It's invisible.
Just to kind of elaborate on it a little bit more, when I watch your videos, and people have asked me, I said, well, if you think in terms of like a hubcap, right?
Yeah,
You have the middle of that hubcap, that would be what people refer to as the North Pole,
yeah,
and then all around that hubcap would be where the continents are, and the outer rim of the tire is what we are referring to as Antarctica.
yeah,
So
yeah,
Antarctica is not really a cap on the bottom of a globe. What it really is the rim
yeah.
around, for lack of a better term, a
A,
circle.
yeah, giant frozen rim that's climate is so aggressively hostile that no one, that nobody approaches it. And the only people that are out there right now are military
Yeah.
or military scientists.
Now, also from your video,
Hmm.
I think if I recall, you said that Antarctica basically ramps up geographically and it's 10,000 feet or 2 miles,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
it is the most unique continent in our world, regardless whether you think it's a globe or some sort of flattish surface. Antarctica ramps up 2 miles high almost immediately, and it stays at 2 miles. That's minimum. And then there's mountains that are on top of that, so it goes up very, very high. The ice is very thick in some places, but it between the altitude sickness and the very cold climate, it's the most hostile place on Earth to humans.
And no country has laid claim to it. In fact, there's a treaty in place.
Yeah, yeah,
Everybody has to play ball and be nice, right?
yeah. The treaty, which was put in place in 1959, called the Antarctica Treaty, again, which was so bizarre because everybody knew in the early 1950s, it was announced publicly that it was a land of very, very rich resources. It was basically made out of money. There was environmental concerns. There weren't any. There was no indigenous population. There was no animal life, no plant life. And in 1959, for whatever reason, all the world's major players decided to put a treaty in place where they said, not only is nobody going to own it, nobody's going to go there. No corporation is allowed to go there, and the treaty isn't even up for debate until I believe 2041
Right.
right now, and it's ridiculous. There's no way that happens in our world.
And it is a no-fly zone.
It depending on who you talk to. Yeah, for some reason, they said that at least back in the 60s and early 70s, it was, that you could fly towards the perimeter, but then I think there was a New Zealand flight, and I don't have the number in front of me, that went down in the early 70s, and all hands were lost, and then they immediately said, well, no one's ever going to fly over that again,
Mm,
publicly.
okay.
So
So, Mark, you said before you think the dome is how high, the altitude?
I'd say minimum 400 miles.
How do you estimate that?
I estimate that based on the high altitude nuke tests that they started in 1958. And for those people that didn't know, there was no rocket program anywhere until 1957. And then within a year of that, and that was the United States and Russia, they were the only ones with them at the time. Then they started putting atomic weapons on the top of them in 1958 and
Right.
started firing straight up and doing high altitude tests. Now, I use the 400-mile minimum because if I'm not mistaken, and I don't have it in front of me, I think one of the highest shots they did, and again, you're going to have to believe the military on this one, they said was 400 miles. And then all the other probing shots, and they did high altitude atomic testing for 4 years. So from 1958 till the end of 1962, and then Russia and America, I'm sorry, the USSR at the time, they both concluded, they both stopped firing on the exact same day. And don't think for a second it was just one of those peaceful moratorium things. That was arranged. It's like, all right, we give up. We've mapped the whole thing out. At least in my opinion, it was like they were painting the sky. So
Right.
anyway, that's the long version of where I got the 400 miles. I mean, I know there's some people that say it's much shallower, but there's also a whole bunch of people that say it's much deeper.
Right.
So it's like I kind of got to play the gray area on this.
Yeah, because I was going back to what Mike was saying before about that shield they found. That shield is actually on the inner edge of the outer belt of the Van Allen belt is where they found the shield that Mike was talking about before, that the University of Colorado. It actually is on the edge of the Van Allen belt.
And to your point, for me, I was even having a hard time with the Van Allen, trusting the Van Allen belt discovery. One, because it was discovered by a NASA employee, not a coincidence.
Right.
And two, when it was discovered in 1959, was also the same year they shut off Antarctica permanently.
Right.
What I like to say is, I believe in coincidences. I've just never seen one. And that kind of plays into me. It's like, okay, so now you have the x-axis and the y-axis both sealed off. At the same time you shut off the outer edge, you also say, oh, by the way, there's this super deadly, dangerous belt of, bands of radiation that nobody's supposed to go through. And I think that bit them in the butt later, because they had 10 years to try to figure out how to, come up with shielding for such a radiation belt, and they didn't. And they just sent the astronauts anyway, and no one who wants to talk about that. I can't wait, one day if I ever get a NASA guy on the phone to talk about that. Hey, you went, you do all these Apollo missions. You came, you went there and back, and not only did nobody die, but nobody even got mild radiation sickness. And each of those capsules, which should have been contaminated to no end, they're sitting at the Air and Space Museum. They don't have anything on them.
I have doubts about the Apollo mission for different reasons, but as far as satellites and stuff and meteors,
Yeah.
Meteors come down and hit the Earth, and people claim they have fragments of it and they've tested them. Do you think it's all
Sure.
bogus? That's all fake?
No, because meteors have been around for a long time, long time before a space program. But for me, if it is an enclosed system, meteors are a really nice little reinforcement package. You just introduce, chunks of metal at speed, perhaps through a rail gun or whatever you want, and let the atmosphere and friction do the rest.
Right.
Make sure you don't aim for any population centers, which is why I think that thing that happened in Russia not too long ago was probably too close of a call.
Satellite's a big question for me, because supposedly GPS works off them, right?
God, yeah, and then we're talking about layers of stuff, because
Yeah.
the GPS system, which went online in 1995, that for me is completely suspect. One, because it doesn't seem to have much coverage in the southern hemisphere, and if it's a global positioning system, you think it'd have total coverage there. I think the GPS system was built mostly to guide people directionally, because it not only does it tell you where you are, but remember, it's a military-based system. It was built by the United States Department of Defense.
Right.
So they're going to also be able to tell you, show you, they'll be able to steer you in certain directions if they want as well. But for satellites in general, because a couple different ways you could go here. There's real-time, supposedly satellite trackers, and there's probably like 20,000 plus satellites, maybe even more, what they say. And if it is a globe, the globe should just be bristling. It should be like that Pixar movie WALL-E, when they left the planet, they were like bumping through all these satellites on the way out because there were so many satellites. And yet when they do these flyovers on the Earth, these curvature things where they're supposedly traversing the globe, you don't see any satellites. You don't see any glistening, because they're all very, very reflective. But for me, here's the big one, and that is the ISS. The International Space Station. And that was the videos, and I was just turned on to it, late last year. The videos that are coming out of there, the interior shot videos are embarrassing. They're horrible. And if anyone hasn't seen it, just look up on YouTube ISS hoax. If the interior shots are that bad, the question then becomes, we obviously have the technology to do some wonderful things. So why are you faking people on the ISS? Why is no interior shot wider than a small jet airliner? Why are there no hatches between all these sections that you're flying through? It should be like a submarine. You get a puncture in one of these holes, nobody's wearing a spacesuit, it's game over. Why are the women, why do they have their hair, permed or hairsprayed?
Doesn't move. Their hair is up in the air, right?
Oh my God. And yeah, to the point where they even caught flack, where the brunette lady, I can't remember her name, I should probably remember it for stuff like this, where she was called Medusa in one of the hoax videos, because her hair was like, not only was it permed, it was kind of snaky. She cut her hair I think a month and a half ago, to where her last interview, she's wearing really, really short hair.
Uh,
And I was like watching this going, well, that's what you should have done in the first place. It's like, or wear a hat or pull your hair back. It's like, what director allows that to happen? I don't know where you got him from. Fire this person if you haven't already.
Now, is it possible, Mark, that the satellites and the space station, just putting this out there, is
Yeah.
it possible that they're real, but they're reaching a point right before the dome? In other words, they're up there, but it's right before the ceiling.
People have postulated that to me, and it's very possible.
Hmm.
Absolutely, it's possible. Is there some sort of gravity issue when you get up that high? Is it a point where, like the sun and the moon, you can actually circle the Earth? Like like you're flying in a circle, not around a globe, but just flying in a circle in the air, where you can pull that off. Is there a technology being used there that we don't know about? Very, very possible. However, if that's the case, the GPS system, I don't think would have dropped off as. Again, I'm on the fence when it comes to that. Yeah, it's very, very possible. It's also possible at the same time that maybe you put something up there that looks like the ISS, but you don't put people on it because it's just too risky. You don't want to, because at that point you're using a technology that's just a little iffy, and you're not, like anything, you don't take chances. And so, you fake the stuff on the ground, and, you put something big up there that people can take pictures of and say, oh yeah, there's people up there. It's possible.
So, and going back to the point that Al made on the meteorites, so it sounds like your perspective on this is that what it really is a gigantic virtual reality.
I was going back to that too. You think like someone had a rail gun, they can just shoot meteors into the atmosphere higher up and just have them come down, you're saying? Or
Sure. I'm not talking about, like a Star Trek Next Generation holodeck. I'm talking like a literal terrarium. So it's like a hybrid between a terrarium and a planetarium. So everything on the ground looks like it normally would. But everything in the sky, is either projected or a very, very beautiful rendered image. But then again, you have to throw in some real stuff every once in a while, some three-dimensional stuff to give it, that sense of realism, because the illusion is the most important thing. And for people that haven't been to like a planetarium, or I mentioned this yesterday. Going to Disneyland, if anyone's ever been to Disneyland, gone to the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, try to find the wall in that. And that ride is 60 years old. It's stars in a beautiful, beautiful setting. You feel like you're in the Caribbean Ocean somewhere, but you're just on a soundstage. But you have to mix in the little, the three-dimensional with the two-dimensional stuff. So yeah, to your point, meteorites, easy to do, because, all you need to do is introduce them at speed and friction, and make sure they detonate sometime, before they hit the ground. Because as far as I know, and at least in our civilization, we've never had a big strike. And all the craters below hand, because people say, well, that big one, I think it's in New Mexico or Arizona, that was before us. So, that could have, been done by the older civilization, or could have been designed before we were introduced.
yeah,
Well, it's interesting because if you sit in a planetarium
Hmm.
and you look up and they project the stars, it looks very real, right?
Yeah.
I remember going to planetariums more so when I was a kid, and I remember sitting there in awe because I would look up and it looked exactly the way it looked if I was sitting in my backyard and looking up at the sky.
Yeah.
I don't know. I know that I think that again, your position on this is that the stars, the constellations, the moon and the sun are you saying that they are projections?
The stars and the planets for me would be a planetarium type scenario. The moon and the sun, though, are completely different. Because they're so much larger in the sky, you'd want to put some extra detail into that. So, the sun is a projection system of its own. I have little doubt that it's a 3D object, not, of course, 92 million miles away, and the moon not 237,000 miles away. But the moon for me is also it's its own projector, a lesser light, because you'd have to do it at the very least to do the lunar eclipses, the blood moons. You'd have to have its own projection. Some people say, well, it's projected upon. It's like, you don't have to. From a design standpoint, it'd be easier just to make it self-contained, like the sun, just way less bright.
Is it possible, though, Mark? I mean, would you be open to, let's just say that it's not a projection system with regard to the stars and constellation, but it's basically they're outside the window. It would be like, I guess the analogy I could make is right now I have a window by my desk and I'm looking outside and there's a tree. And the tree is not being projected. The tree is there. but I see it through a window. Is it possible that space and the constellations are there, but we're seeing it or watching it through a window?
Of course, it's possible. And that was one of the first questions I got, when this thing started was, is there space? Is there space outside of the structure? And my argument is this: it's like it's very possible, but from everything I've seen, it's not necessary. Meaning, if the structure is built small, if you're building small locally, you don't have to build big outside of that, because all you have to do is create the illusion of big and everybody buys it, which they do. So if you start small, you keep it small, you keep it efficient, you keep it compact. Now of course you could go big, but if you're going to go big outside, then why not make the whole, then at that point, why aren't you doing a globe and a real solar system and the whole nine yards? So for me, it's kind of either one or the other. Yeah, you could mix it, and some people have suggested it's like, okay, maybe we're on a much bigger plane and maybe the stars are real. For me, it's still just yes, absolutely possible. You don't have to do it. And for me, it makes it much more intimate. The stars actually may be real objects from a holographic standpoint, or could be, tiny physical objects. But for me, there are stars and are galaxies. I don't go into the big realm in this model.
What's also interesting is you mentioned the moon, and the moon is much closer than we're told, and the sun,
Yeah.
and so on. And
Yeah.
that reminds me of some work that Crow did also. He actually did an exercise, and he put the video out there where he actually did some comparisons mathematically with, say, craters on the moon, and how close or how far they would actually have to be if you can actually see them through a certain telescope with a certain lens magnification and everything else. And the conclusion that
Hmm.
he came to was that the moon is much closer
Oh yeah. Yeah.
than we're being told.
Yeah, I have no doubt whatsoever that the moon is close. It feels closer, not just because of his videos. I mean, yeah, I was a little skewed because I spent the last 3 or 4 years looking up, because the Colorado night sky is very clear because we're at high altitude, and I've spent the last 3 or 4 years with night vision binoculars, just looking up and around. And even before I got into the flat Earth models, I was looking up there and I was going, if you get your eyes adjusted well enough with night vision binoculars, you're looking up there and you're going, wow, if you didn't know any better, you'd confuse all those stars with some sort of textured ceiling. And for me, looking at the moon, it was like, wow, that thing looks so, yeah, always looks closer than what it is. But it is what the authority tells us it is. If they
Right.
say it's 237,000 miles, who are we to question, right?
Yeah, and that's even if people even know the 237 number.
Yeah,
Most
yeah,
people are oblivious. They just don't care, they don't give
no,
it any thought.
Mark,
Now, go ahead,
in
Al, I'm
relation
sorry.
to the orbit of the sun,
yeah.
I watched a few of your videos. So just explain how you think the sun,
Account for sunrise and sunset.
yes,
Okay.
and change in seasons, because supposedly, the sun's orbit contracts and expands, and
Yeah, excellent point. So this is where the pure flat Earth groups come into play, because they say, well, if it's flat like a coin, here's how the sun and the moon, revolve around. The sun is literally doing, a kind of a circular pattern, but it changes slightly every day to account for the seasons.
seasons.
In the model that I use, which is based on the more or less the Orlando Ferguson one, if there is sort of a roulette table hump in the center, that really helps with the sunrise and the sunsets. From a light standpoint. And there's some animations out there. I'm still trying to get a computer graphics guy to come up with a better one than the ones that are out there before I got involved. However, when it comes to the seasons, what you're talking about, remember, as far as the sun and the moon and the stars and the planets, they are, for lack of a better word, just a giant clock system. Now, the sun gives off heat, yes, absolutely, and it moves in the sky. It takes either the path. If you're looking at it from a circular top-down point of view, it moves in and out. The track changes, but it also is not the only thing that accounts for the temperature models that are in this enclosed system. There's other work at play here. There's the molten rock systems at play. There's the underwater conveyor system. There's the jet stream. Between those three things, and I kind of treat it like a car. You have your heated seats in your car, you have your air conditioning in your car, you got your windows, you got your sun coming through the front windshield. Between all these four things, everything kind of works in tandem. And for me, the sun and the moon, when it comes to the seasons, they're really just markers in the sky. as far as, I mean, yeah, the sun, everybody knows the sun gives off heat, but it's not the only process that affects the weather on this planet. And for me, it's just the sun is, it is literally just a giant clock system that lets us know when the seasons are.
Now, how about the precession of the equinoxes?
People have mentioned that to me. Same with the Coriolis effect and everything. All the stars you see in the sky. From a model point of view, when it comes to building this stuff, and I can only say it's coming from a game environment, we can do this now in simulations, on a much smaller scale. You can't do it necessarily in planetariums. That's a little older technology. But in game technology, or entertainment technology, you use programming instances. So basically, you can change perspectives of the stars. So people think they're looking at different, they're looking at the same sky, but they're not.
Right.
It's all phased instance, and I know that's a fancy word, but people in the gaming world, they're going to know what this is. From an instance standpoint, you can break it down by region, you could break it down by country if you wanted to. The sky is what they want you to see. How's that?
Now, Mark, the other question that I have here is getting into more, I guess, of the actual perceptions that people have.
Mm-hmm.
The math that I have, and hopefully it's the right math here, is that after 3 miles, we should see a declination, a descent, because if you're on a globe, of nearly 6 feet, and after 30 miles, it's 600 feet, and then 300 miles, it becomes 60,000 feet, and so on.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, it's something like that, right? So,
Yeah.
so the thing is, I guess one of the problems that people have, and it's because of the entrainment and it's the teaching that goes on in, when you go to school, it says that, first of all, you don't feel the rotation of the Earth because the Earth is so big and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I was having this discussion with Al before, and he disagrees with me on this, but I remember I would be sitting at a beach and I would have a pair of binoculars and I would watch a sailboat moving away from me.
Yeah.
And at the time, I didn't think about it, but as I'm watching it, that sailboat eventually disappeared, not because it descended along the curvature of the globe, it just basically was out of sight.
Like the railroad track argument.
The railroad track argument, right?
Yeah, where
So
it just gets narrower and narrower to the point where you can't see it
you
anymore.
can't see it anymore. So,
Yeah.
And I remember thinking back now, what should have happened after I'm looking at this math now, because I got myself educated at 56 years old, is that what I should have been seeing was that the sail, I should have seen it kind of just descending into the horizon,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And I don't recall seeing that. And the other thing I mentioned to Al before we got on the call here was I did a lot of business travel for over 30 years. And I would be in the airplane at 30,000, 33,000 feet.
Mm-hmm.
And I would look out the window, and I never saw a curvature. I would look at the horizon, and it was flat.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I just want to get your thoughts on that.
And again, mine is a little trickier because on the Orlando Ferguson model there is a slight curve.
Okay.
And it's really only in the northern hemisphere, from what I've seen. And again, I'm flexible on this. If because nobody knows exactly what the lumps are on this thing. But you're right on a couple points here. One, the ships, and I encourage people to because more people are starting to do their own tests now. There was a test done, I think, in Great Britain years and years ago it was done on a canal where it was like 6 miles and the curvature should have gone down like 16 feet in 6 miles. And again, there's so much discrepancy. People have a hard time getting consensus just exactly what the curve is. But they said at that point they could not see any curve. And there's a lot of neat videos out there that are just coming out this year, 2015, for whatever reason. It's a weird year, where there's people taking really good high-def zoom cameras, and they're putting it at beach level, say 3 feet high, and they're taking pictures of shores that should be, they're a good enough distance away to where you shouldn't see the entire shoreline.
Right.
It should be bent up, and they're seeing, sure enough, the entire shoreline.
Yeah.
And so. And it really depends where you are. When it comes to the ship stuff, I've also seen the same thing where they're taking pictures of tankers, which you can't see with the naked eye, but it appears that you're seeing the entire hull of the ship. So it's a tough one, and it's one I didn't really include in the videos because it's more difficult for people to get their heads around, and the evidence for me just wasn't as conclusive as I would have liked.
And by the way, from my perspective, what I'm saying is not scientific for the audience. It's anecdotal. I mean, these are my observations, and this is why this topic piqued my interest. But Al, I think you're going to say something.
Yeah, it piques my interest too. Because I mean, back to the point before, people taking high-powered telescopes or whatever on the beach. In theory, then someone can sit on the coast of Angola, point across the ocean, and see Brazil, right?
Yeah, that is the old argument. And if somebody actually had the ability to take an observatory telescope and make it go horizontal, that would be very, very interesting.
They should do it.
But somebody should do it if it was very possible. I think also, from a testing point of view, it's interesting because if you had the GPS system in effect and you said, okay, this boat's at a certain point, we should not be able to see it anymore, then the telescope shouldn't be able to see it either. Because it shouldn't make any difference. Because it doesn't matter how powerful the lens is. If the curve is truly, a certain rate, the boat should be absolutely cannot be visible.
Right.
But sorry, I forgot the thing that you mentioned before about the airplanes.
At 30,000 feet, I would look out the window. I would look at the horizon, and the horizon was flat. I didn't see a curvature.
Yeah, and there's a whole bunch of weather balloon footage that's been coming out again this year, and it really depends which footage you look at. Because, like, if you look at the famous one that was covered on national news, big shock, by Red Bull, that was done with a fisheye lens. Everybody knows what a fisheye lens is, and I'm not necessarily saying it's sinister. That people like using fisheye lenses at high altitudes because it gives them a better perspective.
Right.
But it also creates a false plane. So, it artificially creates a curve. And you know this because when you're down on the ground, you're still seeing a curve, a sharp curve. That's why they call it a fisheye lens. But there's all sorts of other weather balloons that are people putting up there, and they blow at, 120,000 feet max, maybe 130,000 feet. And those people, the independents that are showing up there, they don't show any curve at all. So, and I got to call out the Red Bull guy because before the camera that was inside the capsule, before he jumped out, when he was looking out at the plane, that was perfectly flat. And then they changed, they went to a different camera as soon as he left, and it's like, oh, then it's all curvy.
On the same token, I mean, I sent the video to Mike. I mean, I guess people might say it's a fake video, but it's a Lockheed U-2 flight at 70,000 feet.
Yeah.
It shows a curvature. It could be fake. It could be the lens.
Well, it wouldn't necessarily be fake. I mean, it was a U-2 plane?
It was a Lockheed U-2 flight, 70,000 feet trainer video. It was a guy piloting it. There was a guy in the back, some British dude who was basically filming it. And they showed it from basically low flight up to high flight. And
well, we can send the link over to Mark.
I can look it up. It's cool. But my first impression, okay, so it's a spy plane footage? That's the, it's not exactly objective in my opinion, but I'd be more than happy to look at it. Absolutely.
So, Mark, one of the things that I think that we probably should just talk about a little bit, and I want to be respectful of your time here, is Admiral Byrd. And I don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but okay. Because that was a big piece of your video, because Admiral Byrd, he made his excursions down to Antarctica. He did it a few times, and he's actually a major player, whether he meant to be or not.
Oh yeah,
right. In this whole theory, because of his trips he made to Antarctica. So could you just take the audience through that a little bit?
Oh yeah, this man should have had movies made about him many times over by now. This guy not only was the greatest American hero when it came to exploration. He was the youngest admiral ever in the United States Navy. He made admiral at 41, which is amazing. And he is mostly known, and I just kind of dug into it because I used to be a Hollow Earth guy some years ago, maybe 10 years ago, because the Hollow Earth story is really, really great, and it revolves around him.
Right.
In 1926, he took a plane up to the North Pole, and the story, the official story is, well, he just went to the North Pole and back, but the unofficial story is that he found some sort of opening in the North Pole, which could have been, that top of the roulette table, bump or hubcap, and that he went inside and he found an entire another, race of civilization, a race of giants and, kind of a land of the lost, journey to the center of the earth type thing. And it was a fantastic story. And, other things have been kind of based on it, but nothing, from a factual account. And then right after that, you would have thought he would have continued that. Right after that, he was sent down to the South Pole in 1928. And from 1928 till his death in 1957, his entire career, the rest of his career, was spent at the South Pole doing major expeditions. And it was like he was looking for something. But I don't even know if he was in on it. I'm kind of on the fence. For me, it was like I knew that, there's some secret societies out there that knew what the world looked like. Fine if it's not perfectly flat, that's one thing, but it wasn't a globe, and I think some societies knew it. I think he was their point guy, and like sending Indiana Jones if he worked for the government officially, and just keep sending him out there. And so from 1928 till 1954, he was doing these expeditions in Antarctica, and it was almost like they had given up looking for it. Because in 1954, he comes back on CBS television, and there's a YouTube video, and I think that just came out like last year. We were so fortunate to have it, where he goes on a CBS show, and he says, "Oh yeah, by the way, Antarctica is the most important place on Earth for science. It's got enough coal to supply the entire world. It's got oil, it's got minerals, it's got uranium. Every country's down there. Everything's super great." And he even discussed the next expedition, which was coming up in 1955, called Operation Deep Freeze, which he was going to lead. And then he goes down and does Operation Deep Freeze in 1955 to 1956, and there's Murphy's Law for you, because at one point they were going to make a ton of money. That was the whole thing. It's like, okay, well, the Earth, apparently all the old maps are wrong, so let's just make money. And then, that's Murphy's Law. Well, then you find it, whatever it is, whether it's an edge, whether it's a big marker, where there's a bunch of frost giants holding axes saying you can't go any further,
Right.
or it's spaceships.
It's a dead end.
Yeah, it's a dead end. And they shut off at that point. That's when everything got weird. In 1957, they start the rocket program. And I felt, people, depending on how you look at this, he died in 1957, which was only a year after Operation Deep Freeze. And for people say, oh, was it a cover up, or did they take him out because he was going to talk? And I go, okay, you can look at it one of two ways. Either from an explorer's standpoint, because he was the greatest explorer in the world, if he actually made it to the end of the world, well, that's it. At that point, he's like, in my mind, yeah, maybe he died of closure. It's like, well, I'm just going to have a bottle and sit in my chair and think about the good times. Or at the other side, it's like, well, maybe he was like, other people in the past. It's like, well, I'd like to go and talk about this. And they had a vote, and they said, no, you can't talk about this. And he disagreed. But either way, he only had to keep the secret for a year, which was great. But
It's interesting too, because he wasn't the only one that was interested in Antarctica, right? So we have the legend of the Nazis also.
Oh yeah,
Down in Antarctica, right?
Yeah,
So Antarctica has always been one of those places that it is a lot of legend, but we don't get a whole lot of hard facts.
No.
But it's interesting that these legends persist.
Yeah. Operation High Jump, which he led, again, Admiral Byrd. The fact that the story goes that the remainder of the Nazi forces, especially the naval forces, went down to Antarctica, and similar to an Indiana Jones movie, where it was like they were looking for it too,
Right?
whatever it was. And so Admiral Byrd led Operation High Jump, which was a full-blown carrier group, 13 ships, 5,000 men, down to Antarctica in 1946. And people keep saying, oh, you should talk about that more. It's like, well, no, because whatever happened, and they absolutely took care of it, because by 1954 it's like, oh yeah, let's just make money. So if they did engage the Nazis in 1946, fantastic story, wish they'd make a movie about it, but we're never going to know that one for sure.
That's the story where, and correct me if I'm wrong, where his ships were attacked by advanced technology, advanced craft,
yes.
Right?
Yeah, and the story goes, and again, whether you want to believe it or not,
Right.
the story goes that the Nazis actually, ran into an advanced race down there and asked them for asylum, to the point where the asylum conditions were, well, if you go with us, you're never coming back. It's sort of a catch there. And
see, I've been into the UFO field for a long time, so I'll admit I am very skeptical of the flat Earth theories, but
sure.
Yeah, that was a big reason I heard that whole area was off limits, is because of
because of advanced technology and alien technology.
Exactly.
And I would
one
be
of the
with
reasons.
you.
Yeah,
I would be with you on that as well. However, Antarctica, even if it's the size that they declare it is, we're talking about millions of square miles.
right.
You wouldn't need to. From a government standpoint, you could set up some sort of perimeter. You could own it to where, it's a classified area, or you can say we're going to build a secret military base down here, or joint secret military bases. For me, it seemed bigger than that, because we can come up with cover stories for just about anything. We can seal off a big chunk of Nevada. That's no problem. Nobody cares. But to seal off something the size of South America. Just abandon all hope and say nope, nobody's going there. That kind of rings of something. Unless it's an alien structure that's so large that it defies description. Yeah, I mean that's possible. Sure.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I don't see it brought up a lot in the flat Earth theory. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I started researching it a little while ago, and Mike was telling me about it, and I started doing a lot of reading on it, and I'm kind of a technical person myself. I mean, one thing that I don't see ever really talked about is radio communication. Something like skywaves, which are used in shortwave radio transmission, which was basically discovered in the early 20s by amateurs. One of the purposes was to bounce signals off the ionosphere and bounce it back, and this way they can have intercontinental communication. It travels a lot further, and it was basically the major function of it was to get around the curvature of the Earth by bouncing signals off of the ionosphere and then back down so you can have long-range communication. I mean, if the Earth was flat, I'm thinking you wouldn't need that. You probably wouldn't need cell phone repeaters. You probably wouldn't need separate, I don't know if you know anything about HARP technology, about geoengineering, which is another thing I wanted to bring up if there is a dome about geoengineering.
Sure.
There's a lot of ionosphere heaters around the Earth. I think it's like 26 of them the last time I heard. I'm thinking if the Earth was flat, they wouldn't need that many to cause an effect that they want, which is heating up the ionosphere, which has all different types of side effects as far as like causing rain, evaporating rain. Supposedly HARP can bounce off the ionosphere, come back down, cause earthquakes. But my main thing is with the stuff like shortwave radio, where that type of technology that was developed back in the 20s to get around the curvature of the Earth so they can have intercontinental communication by bouncing signals off the ionosphere and back down. Before that, they were setting signals, I guess, laterally, like across. It wasn't making it because of the curvature. So what they decided to do, I guess by experiment too, was they started aiming it up. It would go high up, and then bounce off, kind of like an upside down triangle. You know what I'm saying? Starting from the point A, going up into the point of a triangle, and back down at the point they wanted to. And that was their way of getting around the curvature, where if they set the signal straight without bouncing it up, it wouldn't make it, or it'd be very weak, or they wouldn't receive it at all. So, have you ever looked into that?
Out of all the emails I got, I think I had one guy. So you're in a pretty small group. One guy that actually mentioned something like that to me, and I hadn't dug into it that much. But to your point, because as you were rattling it off, it made me think. Yeah, bouncing stuff off the ionosphere is an interesting angle. But let's say it was even a more physical structure. Call it a force field, call it a heavy element, whatever you want to call it. Maybe bouncing it off, still bouncing it off accomplished the same effect they desired. Because remember, if they were trying to go for a globe, all they had to do was get successful transmissions. So if they did this, they would still fit into the globe model. But they did it because they thought it would work, and it did work.
Mark, maybe we can switch gears a little bit and just talk a little bit about one piece that I found very interesting as I was watching your videos, and that had to do with the plane routes. So could you explain to the audience a little bit about what you found when you did that analysis and you had put that video up?
That was one of those things where I didn't, I said when I was building it, I was going, okay, not only did I have to build it, and try to logistically work out, the details of everything, but I also had to figure out, it's like, okay, how would you hide it? Because there's some things you can't hide, some things that absolutely are very, the three rules. One is the space program has to be, fudged or faked to a certain, to a very high degree. The second thing is, of course, you can't get any pictures of the Earth from any decent orbit because, well, you can't get up that far. But the third thing was the plane routes, which is even though on an azimuthal map, which the United States government and the United Nations flag uses, even though those things aren't supposed to be taken literally, on a flat or an enclosed system, they are literally. And if you look at the map, it's a really, really interesting thing that Australia and South America, call it bad luck in design, are exactly, the farthest points on the map. And so, and I did not discover this on my own. I give credit where credit is due, and it was this German guy who had put some stuff out there. He goes, look what happens when you try to get, a direct flight from, say, Australia to somewhere in South America. And he goes, it's bouncing you all over the place. It doesn't make any sense. Why are there so few nonstops? Just a handful of nonstops. And I said, okay, I'll take this challenge. So I started looking around. I did the same thing. And The one that caught my eye, of course, the most was if you go from Sydney to Buenos Aires, and it goes through Los Angeles or San Francisco. It's like, because on a globe that absolutely makes no sense whatsoever. And when I'm looking at it, but if you overlay that onto a flat map, on an azimuthal map, it's literally a straight line. It's not even really a dog leg. It's the closest thing to a straight line you'll ever see. And the odds of that being a straight line, the odds of that fitting, going from one projection to another and showing that really, really rang true. And so, but of course, people, because they don't want to believe it, the first thing they did was, it's like, yeah, so even though 95% of the Southern Hemisphere flights were connections, there was still a handful of nonstops. So people immediately after Clue 7 were emailing. It's like, oh, there's these nonstops. They referenced like five. It still amazes me. It's like, well, there's five nonstops. How can you explain those? Because that'll blow the whole theory apart.
Yeah.
And so that when I looked at it, I thought that was very, very interesting, because that's when I looked at planefinder.net and noticed that the GPS tracking system was dropping the planes off when they got, about 150, 200 miles over the ocean. And I was going, wait, why in the world are they dropping it off? And then they were dropping, and I thought it was a fluke, and it was happening to every plane, and they were also dropping it off in the individual plane logs. And I was going, of course, because because you have to hide the route. You can't on nonstops. You don't want to give people. If you're flying from Sydney to Buenos Aires, there's no reason why you have to go past the west coast of the United States. There's no reason for that. But on a flat map, you do. Because if you try to go over the ocean, if you try to make it legit, the ocean is stretched. It's longer than 7,400 miles, which is just an ocean flight. And so they just counted on people's indifference mostly. People are just sleeping in the chairs. They're not looking out the window. Even if they look out the window, they have no idea where they are. Maybe there's cloud cover, maybe there isn't. The pilots certainly aren't going to think enclosed world. And it was one of those things that it was an aha moment, because when I was looking at it, I was going, yeah, that's exactly what I would do to hide this.
Mark, there's another, I don't think this is in your video. I think I was watching somebody else's, and it might have been a German video I was watching, but
Yeah.
planes having the same travel time, let's just say east and west. So
Oh, yeah.
as an example, right? So if
Yeah.
I'm flying out of RDU International Airport here in North Carolina and I'm flying over into the UK,
Mhm.
that's 5 hours.
Yeah.
If I get on the airplane to come back home in the UK, back to Raleigh, it's 5 hours.
Yeah.
And it would seem if a plane were traveling with the Earth's spin, then that plane in essence would be chasing its destination. And if it were if it were flying against the spin or into the spin,
Would shorten
Yeah.
the
then you'd have a convergence, and that would drastically shorten travel time.
And this is a problem that is, and I didn't touch it on the videos,
Yeah.
because it is tough for people to get their head around, because people don't like math. They hate physics. They probably hated their physics class. But here's the deal, and this has bugged people for a long, long time. In fact, there was a Zeppelin test done, I think, in the early 1900s, where they thought the exact same thing. It's like, well, we'll go against the spin. The spin will come to us. We'll just, bring the Zeppelin up, and America should be able to come to us. But the argument is this: if the Earth is spinning at, say, 1,000 miles an hour, and you're flying one way or the other, east-west or west-east, you're either going with the spin or against the spin.
Right.
And scientists will say, well, so you pick one, and you say, well, say I'm going with the spin. Well, gravity's got you locked down, and so you're going with it. It's a relative motion thing, and they're going to throw some formulas at you and say, okay, fine. But can you have it both ways? Meaning, fine, if gravity's locking me down going with the spin, is it also locking me down going against the spin? Because you're absolutely right, with the exception of the jet stream stuff that we run into in America,
Right.
which slows you down like by an hour because it's a headwind or a tailwind. You're right. There's an argument there that it should not be the exact same, thing. And even though that argument's pretty good, the one I still like better is the gravity one, where the merry-go-round example. Whereas if the at the equator it's spinning at 1,000 miles an hour, which is like a merry-go-round, it's going to try to throw you off. And of course it's not. But if you're at the North Pole, you're spinning at 0 miles an hour. So if you take a 100-pound weight at the North Pole, it should weigh 100 pounds. But if you take it down to the equator, it should weigh a little less, not maybe 10 pounds less, not maybe, and scientists will say, well, gravity's going to compensate for it. And it's like, well, centrifugal force counts for something. And we have some very precise measure, things should weigh slightly less at the equator. Not to mention the oceans. The oceans are liquid, and if centrifugal force is kicking in, at the equator, shouldn't it be pulling the oceans to the point where there's a bulge, where there's that the water gets pretty thin at the poles? If that's the case, I mean, these are things, yeah, I'll mention in interviews, but they're tough for me to do in videos because people, their eyes glaze over when you start talking about that stuff. So I try to use broader strokes if I can.
Yeah. Now, and what I want to do, Mark, is maybe to kind of wind things up here a little bit, but this has been a great discussion.
Well, thanks.
People might be saying, and I'm sure they're saying, if they're listening to this, is saying, well, why in God's name would they lie about the Earth being flat? Why would they say it's a globe to begin with? So, and I know you cover this in your video segments, and what I'd like to do is have you offer your perspective on that, and then I'll give some of my perspectives, and Al, you can give yours also,
okay.
Obviously. So why would they do this? I mean, what's the...
If initially 500 years ago, when it became a globe in the first place, I think it was supposed to be a natural part of this enclosed process. I don't think it was just Copernicus and other people. I think it was artificially introduced by the builders / creators themselves because, and I talked about this in the video, where you don't want people, because human beings are different from animals, whereas if we see a fence, it doesn't matter how big our environment is, all we're going to care about is the fence and the border and the confinement. So the easiest way to hide that is to make it invisible. And to make it invisible, you make it a globe. Because if you make it a globe, then people won't even look for the fence. They'll say, oh, well, we can just go round and round and round the Earth and no one's ever going to run into it. However, I believe that natural process was supposed to end sometime last century, where we were, explorers, after the internal combustion engine and steel-hulled ships and explorers, we were supposed to figure this out. Maybe not in 1956, maybe it was sometime a little later, but the authority, and by that, I mean, the very rich and the royalty and, big governments, they made the call, I think. And for me, the reason was, regardless of whether they could reorganize afterwards, there was going to be a huge shift spiritually. And by that, I'm not talking metaphysical stuff. I'm saying that every religion all of a sudden would have confirmation of evidence of a creator, of intelligent design, the handprint of God. And doing that, science and the government would take a beating for a while. And yes, I do think, the ruling powers would eventually, get things back in order, but it would be a mess for a little while. And if there's one thing I've learned about the authority is they don't take chances. It's like, you know what, let's not even bother. Let's just see how long we can hold this. So I think artificially it has been kept a globe for decades at the very least. But there may be a contingency plan in effect. So.
Actually, you covered some of the same type of thoughts that I had, and I tried to think of some things that were outside of your video.
Okay.
And so, to me, it destroys mainstream science's theories on a lot of things. The Big Bang Theory, as an example, right?
Yep.
And today we read intermittently, science publications will come out and talk about finding the God particle, right? So in other words, still looking for God.
Yeah, the CERN experiment. Yeah.
Yeah. And the space program, essentially there would be no space program, and that actually was in your video. You had said that they would all go home and be on an unemployment line.
Yep.
Or at least there would be no space program as presented to the masses. Let me just say that. I mean,
sure.
God only knows what other types of things and technology they have under their belt and black ops programs that we have no idea about. They like to claim, as you had mentioned, that there is no intelligent design, that everything came about by happenstance. From chaos there was order. Mm-hmm. And of course, if there is an enclosure and the Earth is flat, then obviously that can't possibly be true, because somebody or something had to design this pod that we're living on here, but that we call Earth.
Yep.
So none of their mainstream science and their theories and everything else would be possible if we were enclosed. And the way I look at it is, it would also mean that if they came clean on this thing, that the elites are as trapped, quote unquote trapped, lack of a better term, as everyone else, which would make them, well, not elite.
Good
right?
one. Yeah,
Right?
good
I
one.
mean, so that's how I kind of looked at it. So at the end of the day, somebody would say, well, all right, Mike, so why would they do this? It's control.
Yeah.
It comes down to control.
Yeah, why give it up even temporarily? Even if you knew that eventually you could come back around and regain control,
Right.
um, giving up control is not an option for these guys.
Exactly.
And they had the perfect opportunity then. It's like, it's like, if they found proof, it was like, I don't think it even took that long to make the decision. It was like, you know what? It probably was a really short meeting where they're saying, okay, here's probably what's going to happen. Do we do this? Nah, let's talk about it later. Unfortunately, like all lies, it spider webs out, and they have to spend more time and more money. So I feel bad for the NASA guys because they've just getting beat up the last 10, 15 years. But it's rough.
One last question for you, and I should have asked this earlier.
Okay.
In your video segment, you had mentioned that there are no real pictures of planet Earth, that the pictures that we see the globe are composites.
Yeah.
Could you explain that a little bit?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Real quick, 15 years ago and it was right in front of my face. This shows you how good the conditioning was. 15 years ago, when I was looking for pictures of the Earth from space, some high-res shots to put on some computer monitors in the tech support department I was running. And I go online, this is 2000, right? The internet's up, we're running. Do an image search from the Earth from space, and there's literally one shot. Rows and rows and rows and rows of exactly the same shot. And everybody knows which one this is. If you look up the Earth from space on Google, you'll know because it's the only one still out there. It shows a very cloudy planet, mostly Africa, the southern part of Africa, and what they're passing off as Antarctica. And I remember staring at this and literally looking at the screen because I was angry. I was going, NASA, you suck. How in the world are you not putting out more pictures? It's 2000, for God's sake. And the last thing, I would have never jumped to an enclosed world. Nobody would, right? So if you go fast forward 15 years to today, you Google the Earth from space, most of the pictures you will see, and by that I mean 90-something% of the pictures you will see are just composite images. If they aren't all Google Earth snapshots at this point. Google Earth was the greatest cover they ever could have made because it's a real time, spinning around, but that's a composite image. And people don't know what composite images are. Look, that's just strips. It's pieces of a puzzle put together to make it look like a globe. But NASA has, go to a NASA site and look. There's videos on YouTube that talk about, what NASA won't even put on the internet. They'll put them on their own site, and they're horrible. They're terrible. And the reason is why. If you've got tons of satellites and an advanced space program, why are there no pictures of the Earth from space? It is a staggering thing that goes right by people, especially now because they see these images all the time, but they don't realize they're not the real thing. In fact, the composites are better than real life. They're very, very clear.
And also, I've always questioned this, and I'm sure somebody will write me and correct me and tell me how stupid I am, but the Hubble telescope, I mean, it's taking pictures of everything, nebula, distant planets, suns, and everything else, but it has never taken a picture of the Earth or the moon.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think the explanation was, and again, if you guys know better, the explanation was, well, that's because they're too close and, they couldn't focus on it.
I'll throw one more at you. A program that was done like 6-7 years ago, the JAXA program, JAXA, which was the Japanese moon HD space probes that went around the moon, were supposed to take pictures of, the moon buggies and everything, all the equipment we still left, and then take some wonderful shots of the Earth coming back. And I remember when those things launched, supposedly, and then they never talked about them again. And only recently, only like last year, some Japanese people have been putting some of that footage up, and I can see why they never talked about it, because the footage is horrible. They're coming back over the moon, looking at the Earth, and it's in the distance. It's super cloudy. You can't tell where the continents are. And you're thinking, okay, well, we'll just fast forward, and there's going to be your full motion video of the Earth. No. Nothing there. And to one more point, and I know we're right out of time, but to one more point, there was somebody that mentioned to me, they said, you know what? Honestly, with the amount of gear that was supposedly out in space looking at the Earth, there should be a dedicated television channel that runs 24/7 that just shows a real-time rotation of the Earth, and people would subscribe to that thing. And I know they would. Absolutely. Forget about people forget. It's like it's not just that there's no pictures of the Earth. Try to find full motion video of the Earth
Yeah.
from space. There is none. And nobody questions it because it's like they're conditioned by the science fiction movies that Gravity that came out, Interstellar that just came out. It's like, oh, of course the Earth is a globe. Well, why? Well, because we saw a movie.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's like, well, the movie says this is how it's been depicted in movies, books, education, and so therefore it is. I'll tell you what, Mark, you're going to jam a lot of people's frequencies, and I know you are.
Well, they had the NASA STS feed because I know a lot of guys caught some weird objects coming in where the feed would just cut off conveniently whenever a weird object would come into frame.
Oh, sure.
So they do have a live feed online for that. Don't know if they still have it on, but we put some stuff up on the blog about a guy who was, I guess he would sit there all day and watch this thing. I think it was Secure Team, right, Mike?
Yeah. They obviously have no life.
Yeah, and they would record the streams, and whenever they saw some type of weird object come into over the horizon or whatever, the feed would cut off, and they just thought it was kind of weird that the feed would cut off every single time an object would come in.
Interesting.
Calls into question, though, Al. I mean, the whole problem with that is, it's like, we talk about the Apollo missions being faked. I mean, and I hate to say, everything's fake because you sound like a conspiracy nut, which is what they want to call us anyway. But, it gets really bizarre after a while because if you take a look at the Apollo missions and you believe that the Apollo missions were not real from the perspective of what was shown to us, it was basically a TV show.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I know that. I mean, I don't. Well, like I said, I think they were faked for different reasons. I come from the UFO field. But what's your opinion on other life forms, extraterrestrials? I mean, all the accounts.
Oh, I believe in them wholeheartedly. The night vision stuff, the binoculars that I've been using the last few years up here in Colorado. I initially thought when I was looking up there, my first couple nights, I was like going, wow, there are a lot of satellites. And then I saw the satellites move in directions they weren't supposed to. And, do all sorts of weird things, go ballistic, fly in squadrons. There's like an hour chunk between, there's an hour chunk of time any given night, which I call driver's ed, which just seems like there's nothing but training flights. And it may be a Colorado thing, but there's a lot of stuff up there. And from an enclosed world, it makes much more sense because, they could be maintenance. They could be the superintendents, as one person joked, they could be the janitors for all we know.
The maintenance team.
Yeah, but they're not allowed to interact on a mass scale. That's for sure. They've got rules.
So do you think they possibly are able to travel in and out of the dome, pass through it?
Yeah. The question is, are they using a phasing technology to do it? Is it like a dimensional frequency thing? You're like interdimensional tuning like a radio type of thing. Very, very possible.
Yeah,
very possible.
Well, Mark, this has been everything I expected it to be. I'm so glad that we connected because it's one of those conversations you could just have and just let it fly. I'm really glad that you accepted the invitation. So,
thank you. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what. Anytime you want to come back,
okay.
Yeah, it was fun.
Just give me a ring or email me, and we'll get you back on because you're going to pique. Like I said, you're going to pique a lot of people's interest, and you're going to jam a lot of people's frequencies. But so what? It's fun, right?
Yep.
Yeah, indeed.
Good stuff out there. All right. Anything else, Al?
No, that's it. I just come, like I said before, I come from the angle of the old UFO guy. But I definitely, believe me, I have no faith in NASA whatsoever. So if anyone's listening to this, I don't want you guys to think I believe everything NASA puts up.
No. That's very good question.
I definitely think the Apollo missions were faked. I think, the Tonka toys they were showing you on TV was not the real deal. But
the lunar module with the gold tinfoil
on it?
But
I tell Mark, Mike is too. We're also like secret space. We're also into the secret space program type thing too. So I have a whole different theory about what's going on, but I'm not going to get into it here. It's for a whole different show. That's for I guess like a Robert Morningstar.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, Mark. Well, you have a great day.
Hey, you too.
All right, man. All right, and we're going to have the show out probably within about a week, and I'll email it to you. And again, come back anytime.
Fantastic. Thanks, guys.
All right, Mark. Okay. Thanks a lot.
And that concludes our interview with Mark Sargent, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as we did. Mark's videos can be found by heading over to YouTube and typing in Mark Sargent, Flat Earth Clues. And as always, I'd like to thank everyone for listening and visiting the blog, Sage of Quay Radio, which can be found by heading over to sageofquayradio.blogspot.com or by visiting our hub website at www.sageofquay.com. Also, if you get a moment, please take a listen to my album, Leaving Dystopia, by heading over to laboroflovemusic.com. And remember, live in truth and always serve creation. It's really that simple. See everyone next week. Be safe, enjoy, and God bless.